Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 10. The Angels of Mons. During the Battle of Mons in Belgium, fought on August 23, 1914, the British Army was saved by angels. At least that's according to the stories that began to circulate after World War I. In August of 1914, the first major fight between the British forces and the advancing German army was the Battle of Mons. The German soldiers vastly outnumbered the British troops, yet they were thrown back and forced into a rapid retreat. This was one of the most important battles in human history. If the advancing German army had crushed the British, they may have won the war. World War II may have never happened because Germany might have already controlled Europe. It's a bizarre what-if situation. There's just no way to know how the world may have turned out if it hadn't been for the supposed intervention of the angels. Following the battle, a lot of strange and supernatural stories began to be whispered through the trenches. Soldiers who fought at the Battle of Mons said they saw phantom bowmen standing above their ranks and shooting at the Germans. These phantom bowmen were believed to be ghosts from the legendary Battle of Agincourt, fought in 1415. In April 1915, British magazine Spiritualist published a story about a miraculous intervention at the decisive moment in the battle. Someone had reported witnessing angels coming down to help the Brits. After the magazine was published, similar accounts began coming forward like crazy. People reported seeing heavenly clouds descend from the sky during the fight. People said they saw angelic warriors on the battlefield, soldiers dressed in ancient medieval garb. As the stories continued to spread, the British began to believe they were the chosen people of the Christian God. They were so beloved by God that he had sent his angels to push back the evil Germans. Modern historians believe the tales of the angels came from soldiers who hadn't even fought at the Battle of Mons. It may have been a kind of positive propaganda meant to bolster the British spirit and boost morale. There were reports that some soldiers had even witnessed Joan of Arc on the battlefield fighting against the Germans. Number 9. The Crusaders. Shortly after the Russian Empire entered World War I, a group of men descended out of the Caucasus Mountains in Georgia wearing chainmail armor. They were wielding shields and broadswords, looking for battle. These men believed themselves to be the descendants of the Knights Templar. When World War I started, the Russian Empire was enormous. Their territory stretched from the edge of the Pacific Ocean all the way to Finland, including Georgia and Armenia. But although the empire was large, many of its citizens were poor peasants. There were still serfs, or you can call them slaves, in 1914 Russia. This meant most people were bound to the land they worked, just like in the Middle Ages. In Russian Georgia, people in some parts of the country were still living as though it were the 1500s. Specifically, a group of people known as the Kevsurs. The Kevsurs believed that after the Crusades of the 12th century, the knights settled in their region permanently. Instead of continuing on into the Holy Land, they moved into the Caucasus Mountains. They turned into farmers and slowly gave up the ways of war. When World War I broke out, the Kevsurs were still isolated from most of society. When they learned of a great war between the worlds and picked up their weapons and journeyed to the capital to volunteer their services. American adventurer Richard Halliburton wrote about the Kevsurs in his 1935 book, 7 League Boots. He wrote that in the spring of 1915, Crusaders covered in rusty chainmail armor rode on horseback down the streets of Tbilisi, back then known as Tiflis. They fought on behalf of the Russian Empire, which they had been a part of since 1801. In World War I, there were about 200,000 Georgians fighting on behalf of the Russian army. And although the Kevsurs may have started with rusty swords and outdated armor, it's likely when it came to fighting they wielded guns. They fought on the front lines, but it's not exactly clear what became of them. When World War II broke out, the descendants of the Crusaders were nowhere to be found. And now for number 8. But first, it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to Holly Odie5969 and Brett Venice2822 for supporting this channel. Appreciate you all, and if you're new here, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Number 8. Operation High Jump. The reason behind a US Navy expedition to Antarctica in 1946 may have been to fight against alien forces allied with Nazi Germany. It's completely outrageous, but that's what the conspiracy says. The scientific expedition, codenamed Operation High Jump, was a very real thing. It was run by a branch of the Navy called Task Force 68. There were 4,700 military personnel involved, operating off the flagship USS Philippine Sea. The aircraft carrier had other naval support ships and aircraft. The man in charge of the naval expedition was polar explorer Admiral Richard Byrd. The official story is that Richard had been given orders to extend American sovereignty to Antarctica. But the trip didn't go very well. After only 8 weeks, the operation was abandoned with fatalities. When the admiral was questioned about what happened, he supposedly said the soldiers encountered a new breed of enemy that could fly at incredible speeds. The Chilean press released some statements from the admiral after the operation was over. However, most of what Byrd said was largely related to the possibility of an enemy attack coming from Antarctica. It's a little vague as to whether he believed there was some sort of advanced base there already. The admiral was simply adamant that Antarctica was a potential danger. It wasn't until after the Soviet collapse of 1991 that classified documents were revealed showing the mysteries around the expedition. The documents have not been authenticated, but they do reveal some unusual information. Joseph Stalin had supposedly ordered an intelligence report on the mission to Antarctica. The Russians learned that the US had gone to destroy a secret Nazi base of operations, but on the way they allegedly encountered a UFO that destroyed several of their ships. The United States has never admitted to a Nazi base in Antarctica. Neither has Germany, but the Russians may have believed there was, and that the Americans went to destroy it only to get into a scuffle with aliens. Number 7. Hitler and the Spear of Christ. In the 1800s, Ariosophy was developed by Georg Lanz von Liebenfels in Austria. The term can be translated to something like the wisdom of the Aryans. It became a generic term used to describe the bizarre Aryan theories that began taking hold of Germany between 1890 and 1930. Ariosophy, which most people have never heard of before, was the root of Nazi occultism. Germans at the time were having difficulties with modernism and industrialization. Ariosophy tried to explain these evolving technologies as being largely evil. Much of the movement was inspired by ancient Germanic paganism and mysticism. It was the ideas behind the Aryan race and the magic hidden in the world that inspired a lot of Adolf Hitler's bizarre ideology as he established the Third Reich. It was this strange belief in magic that made Hitler search high and low for some of the most outrageous religious relics in the world. One of these relics was the Spear of Destiny. The mythical Christian artifact is said to be the real weapon that pierced Jesus Christ's side 2,000 years ago. A cult tradition says anyone who holds the spear and understands its deeper mysteries can control the fate of the world. Prior to the outbreak of World War II, the alleged Spear of Destiny was on display at the Hofburg Museum in Vienna. Adolf Hitler associated the spear with other magical tales like the Philosopher's Stone and the Holy Grail. One of his first actions after taking Vienna was to remove the Spear of Destiny and keep it for himself. Hitler had the spear buried underneath the Nuremberg fortress for safekeeping. But after his death on April 30th, 1945, it was dug up. The spear is still around today, though scientists have never been able to confirm it has any special powers. Nobody even knows if it really was used to stab Jesus while he hung on the cross in Jerusalem. Number 6. The Red Baron. Manfred von Richthofen was one of the most notorious characters of World War I. You might know him better as the Red Baron. He may have been the deadliest German fighter pilot to ever take to the skies. From 1916 to 1918, he single-handedly shot down 80 Allied aircraft. He did it from his scarlet-painted plane, which he flew ruthlessly. He was in command of the Flying Circus. Manfred earned himself an immortal reputation before his death in a dogfight over France in April 1918. But who was the Red Baron? Manfred was born in 1892 into the lap of luxury. He was part of a Prussian noble family who lived in Poland. His upbringing was extremely privileged. He spent his youth hunting, playing sports, and being rich. But even the rich couldn't escape the torments of war. At the age of 11, Manfred was enrolled in military school. He became an officer in the 1st Ulan Cavalry Regiment in 1911. After World War I started, his regiment saw action on both fronts. He received an Iron Cross for his courage, but reportedly grew restless between battles. Manfred requested an immediate transfer to the Imperial German Air Service because he wanted to see endless action. By June 1915, he was working in a reconnaissance plane. It didn't take long for the Baron to earn his pilot's license. He honed his skills flying missions over France, then went under the wing of experienced German fighter pilot Oswald Boelke. By the beginning of 1917, the Red Baron had already downed 16 enemy planes. He became the highest-scoring living pilot just months after learning how to be a pilot. The Red Baron got his own fighter squadron, painted his plane blood red, and became the scourge of the sky. In the month of April, he shot down almost 24 planes himself. His tally grew to 52 confirmed aircraft kills. But then, on July 6, 1917, he was grazed by a bullet in a dogfight. He suffered a fractured skull and never fully recovered. Modern historians think he was suffering from severe PTSD as well. The hit to his head may have really put a damper on his skills. On April 21, 1918, Canadian pilot Arthur Roy Brown ended the Red Baron's reign of terror. His body was recovered and buried with full military honors. At only 25 years old, and with only 2 years' experience as a pilot, he had accumulated 80 confirmed aerial victories. Have you heard of the Red Baron before? Let me know in the comments. Number 5. The Lost Battalion. In October 1944, Allied forces fought to kick the Nazis out of France. A group of Japanese-American soldiers were deployed on an impossible mission. They were sent deep into the mountains of northeastern France to extract a lost battalion. A unit of Texas National Guards were stuck in the deep woodland, surrounded on all sides by thousands of Nazi troops. The Japanese-Americans were called Nisei during the war. They were part of the regimental combat team. And although they were a unit primarily of people of Japanese descent, their officers were white Americans. Back home in the US, American Japanese citizens had been rounded up and sent to wartime incarceration camps. Even though they were American citizens, they were kept in camps like traitors. Some of the prisoners were sent to the front lines. Despite the humiliating racism they endured at home, the Japanese unit fought through muddy forests and rescued the trapped Texans. Between October 14th and October 31st, the Nisei's unit suffered 800 casualties. Most of them were obliterated, and the few who survived were given medals of honor like candy. Accolades were handed down from President Truman himself. The U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General George Marshall, called the Japanese regiment superb. In 1962, Texas Governor John Connally made those who survived the rest of the war honorary Texans. Number 4. Ghost rockets. Sightings of unidentified flying objects truly peaked during World War II. The Allied fighters who witnessed strange objects in the sky called them Foo Fighters. In Scandinavian countries, they were called ghost rockets. One of the most shocking incidents that occurred in Europe's north was on June 9, 1946. An incredibly bright light was witnessed streaking across the sky above Helsinki, Finland. The light left a smoke trail behind it, and those who saw it claimed it made a noise like rolling thunder. But the craziest thing was that the luminous trail streaking behind the object stayed glowing in the sky for 10 full minutes. Then the next night, the same thing happened. The same ghost rocket was seen streaking over Helsinki, only it was going in the other direction. It couldn't have been a natural phenomenon like a meteor, not unless the space rock turned around and went back into space. This was the most famous of the ghost rocket incidents, but hardly the only one. Military personnel reported over 200 sightings of these bizarre alien rockets streaking across the sky. The objects were described mostly as tubular in shape. They looked almost like giant silver cigars. Sometimes they flew low, sometimes they moved without sound. According to some reports, it became such a big deal that American Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal was summoned to Stockholm. There he met with the Swedish Secretary of War. This was supposedly to discuss the threat of the unidentified objects. On August 11, 1946, a single event in Stockholm saw more than 300 reports of UFO sightings. But none of this became public until the 1980s. In 1984, the Swedish government finally made their UFO files public. UFO researchers quickly gathered over 1,500 reports that had been compiled in secret. Number 3. The sinking of the Lusitania. The RMS Lusitania was a British ship carrying 139 Americans on May 7, 1915. The ocean liner was 11 miles off the coast of Old Head of Kinsale, Ireland, when it was spotted and sunk by a German submarine. The deadly submarine U-20 launched its missiles, and the liner was underwater in 18 minutes flat. This was a real tipping point in the war. It was the disastrous event that finally brought America into the fighting and would ultimately seal the fate of Adolf Hitler. 128 American lives, along with 1,070 other people, lost their lives. But it was the major loss of American life that convinced the US to go to war against Nazi Germany. But what if the sinking of the Lusitania wasn't orchestrated by the Germans at all? What if the future British Prime Minister Winston Churchill conspired to sink the ship himself? The British were well aware that Germany attacked ocean liners. During the First World War, the British shipped weapons on passenger liners and the Germans attacked them. When World War II started, the German government warned that such ships were liable to be destroyed. Churchill really wanted America to enter the war to help ensure victory. Many conspiracy theorists believe Churchill had the Lusitania destroyed as a way to force America to help them. Historian Colin Simpson wrote in 1972 of an alleged Admiralty meeting that took place 2 days before the sinking of the ship. Churchill, though not appointed Prime Minister yet, was at that meeting. He and the other top officials supposedly knew exactly where the enemy submarines were off the coast of Ireland. But instead of preventing the disaster, the Admiralty ensured it. They sent the cruiser Juno as an escort instead of a capable destroyer. The Juno was slow and old, and was hardly much protection. Whether the Brits were really behind the sinking of the Lusitania is a truth lost to history. Many historians say it's nothing but a conspiracy theory. Others say it was a desperate move by the British to ensure their survival. Do you think Winston Churchill conspired to sink the RMS Lusitania? Let me know what you think in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 2. Desmond Arthur's ghost. Desmond Arthur was an Irish aviator born in 1884. He fought in the No. 2 Squadron of the Royal Flying Corps. Sadly, Desmond never made it out of the war, but even after his death, he wasn't done fighting. Arthur died in a fatal aircraft accident. Then his ghost haunted the RAF Montrose airfield in Scotland. Desmond joined the squadron on April 17, 1913. He was stationed at the Montrose airfield, which was used as a base for training pilots. It was the first of its kind in Britain, as fighter pilots were a brand new thing to warfare. But because this was indeed a new branch of fighting, and the technology was new, there were a lot of accidents. The flight training school experienced frequent crashes up until they finally had enough skilled pilots to teach new pilots. Desmond was not around for very long. At roughly 7:30 in the morning on May 27, 1913, his BE-2 biplane collapsed without warning. The whole thing fell apart just as Desmond Arthur started to descend from 2,500 feet. One of the wings snapped off and Desmond was thrown from the aircraft. He died instantly and was discovered 160 yards away from his crashed plane. It was one of the very first fatalities recorded by the Royal Flying Corps and the first death of the airfield. Major Cyril Foggin was one of the first to witness a ghostly apparition in the officers' mess in autumn of 1916. Cyril allegedly saw the ghost but was afraid to report it because he thought his superiors would label him crazy. There were further sightings around the base by both officers and flight instructors. Most sightings of the ghostly figure happened at the old mess where the No. 2 Flying Squadron hung out. People started calling the ghost the Irish apparition. Some pilots were so creeped out, they supposedly tried to request a transfer to a different base. It was the editor of British flying magazine The Aeroplane, C.G. Gray, who decided the ghost was that of Desmond Arthur. He had been a personal friend of Desmond and thought the pilot had unfinished business. Number 1. The Monuments Men. One of the most important units in World War II was the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives Unit. You might know them as the Monuments Men. They were a small group of men, and a few women too, who put their careers as historians and curators on hold to preserve artwork. It was their duty to find and protect priceless artwork pillaged by the Nazis. Although their work was extremely important, they were forgotten after the war. It wouldn't be until the 1995 book about their exploits, written by Lynn H. Nicholas, that the world was reminded of their heroism. Lynn only learned about the Monuments Men when he randomly came across the obituary of a French woman. The woman had been a spy sent to watch the Nazis' artwork looting operation. Single-handedly, she saved 60,000 works of art from destruction. Without the Monuments Men, many of the most important cultural treasures of Europe would be lost right now. Works of art like the Madonna, stolen from Belgium in September 1944. priceless works of art by Johannes Vermeer. Much of the stuff was hidden by the Germans in preparation to be displayed at Hitler's planned museum complex in Linz, Austria. Hitler had a grand scheme that he was going to show off the artwork that he had stolen in his own personal museum. It was the monuments men who secured the works of art from Althaussee, a series of tunnels that had been mined by the same local families for 3,000 years. Hitler was using the tunnels because of the humidity inside and because they were a mile deep into the side of a mountain. From 1943 to 1945, trucks transported heaps of treasure into the depths of the mountain like greedy dwarfs. When the monuments men arrived in 1945, they found 6,577 paintings. There were 137 pieces of sculpture, 122 tapestries, plus over 1,700 cases of books. What's the craziest story you've ever heard from World War I or II? Let me know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and check back soon for more unbelievable videos from the channel.